listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
Welcome to another edition of the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. I'm your host, Femi Abebefe. As always, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Our producer, Elliot Bowman, with us on the ones and twos. And Michael, we woke up this Monday morning and we got a gift from the National Football League. We've now known the opening night game rematch of last year's AFC title game, this time at Arrowhead Stadium, Ravens at the Chiefs. Welcome back, man. We got NFL football on the brain. Let's do it.
Yeah. It's a gift. We can't open it until, September, but at least it's a gift. It's certainly something to talk about.
We can look at it.
I don't think, I know Will Hill, who we talk about on the show, who's a listener, and he also helps on VSiN, part of our team here. He's in charge of all scheduling. We know that because every time there's something wrong, he sends me a text on why it's all screwed up and how he would fix everything, including Tom Thibodeau's substitutions last night. I mean, I got a text from him, what's Thibodeau doing having all those, not only do I have Big Daddy, telling me how to coach, I got Will Hill telling Tom Thibodeau. I said, here, just text Thibodeau. Don't text me. And tell him. I mean, he needs your input. But I don't think he could have picked a better game. I mean, the thing that I like about both teams in the last 5 years are 4-1 in openers. But more than that, I think both teams share a philosophical understanding of how to get a team ready for the opener. I really do. I think that's probably what is going to make this game fun. It's going to make it intense. Andy coming off the loss to Detroit last year certainly has some sting to it. Baltimore didn't play great against Houston in the opener last year, but this will be interesting in the sense of how they prepare their team for the opener and how they start on that. We got Zach Orr, new defense coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. Mm-hmm. That's going to, cause Andy to have to wonder, not in fear, but wonder in terms of expectations, what's he going to do? So it's exciting. I think it's great. And then we go the next night, we go back to Brazil or go to Brazil to watch two teams dressed in green. We'll play, and we'll see all the Brazilians going berserk. Do you realize, Femi, that the American Airlines has put 2 additional flights on to San Pablo, I think, to bring Eagle fans down there? San Paulo, yeah.
That's crazy. Wow. It's going to be Fly Eagles Fly or Go Pack Go down there in Brazil. I mean, I can't wait for that. I mean, we're going to deal with the altitude. Obviously, it's a different time zone and all that stuff. But I think that's going to be a phenomenal atmosphere in Brazil. I mean, we get the first 2 games. Couldn't ask for better games, honestly. You have 2 teams, the Eagles a contender, the Packers, a lot of people like them as a contender, but then you start off with 2 teams that are among Super Bowl contenders, among the favorites, with the defending champion, two-time defending champion Kansas City Chiefs against the Baltimore Ravens, the team that had the best record in the league last season. This is the MVP versus Super Bowl MVP. This is unbelievable. We have a line total side that's up there, and we've already seen movement this morning, Michael. I'm telling you, people aren't messing around. Even though we have to wait until September, they are not messing around. They're betting this thing to the under. Open 49.5, 50. Now it's down to 47.5. Let's go.
Well, I think, and I don't want to sound like I know who's betting, but clearly, as we talked about all offseason, if you're not working on these teams the day after the season and staying on top of it and basically going through your notes and understanding all their movements and where they are to come up with a preliminary 24 power rating, you can't do it in week 1. It's too hard, right? Mm-hmm. So you got to stay on this. And it's interesting that the line moved south quickly because there is some concerns about, is Kansas City, think about it, are they good enough at left tackle? We don't know that yet, right? We don't know that. And are they better at receiver? Rashid Rice is clearly headed down the suspension road. I don't know if that's going to happen, but clearly he's headed there. So where's the juice in their offense? Kelsey's 36. I know he looks like he's 26, but where's the juice in the offense? I know they drafted a really fast receiver. Again, and Baltimore with Derrick Henry, ball control, run the football, that's kind of what they're going to do. He's going to be under center Lamar more. I could see it shrinking down a little bit, and I think for Baltimore, you want it to shrink down. And not that I don't know if Kansas City can play a track meet. I mean, what makes them better this year offensively than they were last year? I think they have to stay in that same lane of Pacheco and run it and be physical and win with defense.
Yeah, I can't wait to see it. The point spread is at 3. The Chiefs, of course, the favorites opening night there. I mean, if you can get that Ravens team +3, maybe that's something that you go down with as we get later, closer and closer to kickoff there. But that's kind of where my eyes gravitated towards, maybe the Ravens.
So you think it's going to? You think it'll stay at 3? Do you think? I think it'll slightly move towards because we know Harbaugh's good in openers, but so is Andy Reid. I think the concern you have to have if you're taking Baltimore is you got to watch a little bit of the preseason to see what they do defensively. Mike McDonald is really good. And I don't think you can just replace Mike McDonald. Zach Orr was on the staff, but he's only been a coach for 3 years. You know, when you mentioned the altitude, that kind of got me thinking. When I spoke, I had a great invitation to this conference in Vail, which had a tremendous amount of people. And it was back in the first part of March. And a lot of the people that were there were mountain climbers that had scaled Everest. Remarkable. Like I could even climb up 10 steps, and that these guys are going up to Everest, right? And one of the guys there was a doctor who specializes in altitude. And he actually is the touring doctor for the Rolling Stones for over 20 years. Can you imagine the stories he could tell?
I mean,
and then now this year, he's the European doctor for Springsteen over there because of the altitude and Springsteen having that ulcer and all that. So they wanted to make sure his insurance company, I'm sure, wanted to make sure they had a doctor on hand. And Dr. Peter is going to do that. But you got me thinking, like if I were one of those teams, Green Bay or Philadelphia, I would call Dr. Peter up and say, hey, help us out here, because he is truly an expert in altitude, which is a rare thing to say, right? Like, who is that? But when you've scaled Everest and you've done all those things in terms of training your body, that's what's going to make that game fun.
And it's not going to be, this is not mile high, it's not Denver type altitude, but it is higher than what we would get normally in Philadelphia. Philadelphia is 39 feet above elevation, and Sao Paulo's 2,500 feet above elevation. So it's obviously much higher than what you typically have in Philadelphia. So I think it's going to be an interesting element of that game and the atmosphere. I can't wait to see it. The NFL's never had a regular season game in Brazil, and they've never done a Friday night opener. Or it's been a while since they've done a Friday night opener. I can't wait for that. Obviously, I'm extremely excited for this schedule. Like I'll say this, and I'm probably I'm preaching to the choir here, because you're a football junkie. I'm a football junkie. Our listeners are football junkies. But just let us have this week. I get it. We all know who everyone's playing. We all know like the matchups, but we don't know the when, the where, and all that. And like that is what we're excited about. And hey, there's something you're excited about that I probably don't care about. But let me enjoy the schedule release. All right. I know it's not till September, but let me enjoy the schedule release. I can't wait for it. My voice, you can tell I'm fired up for this thing. And we're gonna get it on Wednesday, and we'll break it all down on Thursday's pod. Michael, the entire 272 regular season game schedule. Cannot wait for it. All right, let's talk about some football that we saw over the weekend. Rookies have arrived at their mini camps. What goes on at these things for for those of us who are not in the league? What happens at these rookie camps? I mean, all the quarterbacks now arrived. Those are the big headline guys. But for all the rookies, what I guess is being laid down right now to go ahead and I guess have the development for the whole offseason as they head to the regular season?
Well, it's an initiation, and the good teams really, if you're really good at what you do in terms of organizational structure, it's really about onboarding. You know what you want to do with all the people these new people that you're bringing in is onboard them into your culture. You know, tell them exactly what is expected in the culture that you work in. And that takes time. Like, you just can't assume they're all going to get it, and you just can't assume that the older players know what to do or they'll follow it, because this is just the rookies. Now, you can invite some veterans to it, but you can't have anybody else but that. So this is the perfect time for onboarding, for player development of the culture. And I think it's got to be done meticulously in terms of letting the players know exactly what they're expected to do on the field, in the classroom, in the weight room, in the next phase of the offseason program, to the T. There's no evaluation going on. There's none. You can't, because like we saw with some of the guys, I mean, I saw Rome Odunze, he'd be held out because he had hamstring. These kids aren't in great shape. So really the first thing is we're going to get you in the weight room. We're going to test your body. We're going to see exactly where we need to go with your player development based on the conditioning of where you are. And so it's a lot about data collection. It's data collection in one area, and then it's teaching them the culture in the other. And that's got to come from the head coach. It's got to come from everybody understanding what is expected, because you just can't assume they're all going to get it. And so then now, because you couldn't bring the rookies in until today, they have the rookie camp today, and now all the rookies can take part of phase 3 of off-season program for most of these teams, or phase 2, depending on what they're in. And then they get integrated into the system, and then you can continue the onboarding with meetings and all that with all the young players. So that's really what's going on. I mean, look, there's not enough guys to have an 11-on-11, and you wouldn't want that anyway. And you're teaching them, baby, very basic stuff within the framework. You're teaching them how to practice on the practice field more than anything, because it'll be a different practice than what they did in college.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like job orientation. Like, it's like you get hired, and
it's exactly what it is.
Now it's orientation time, and then once you go through orientation, then you can mix in with everybody else, with all the vets and all of those guys. So that's good to see NFL players out there on the field.
You can't expect them to know how to practice, but you got to teach them how to participate in the classroom, right? Mm-hmm. You just can't assume they're going to come in there with sharpened pencils and and notes and write things down and understand it. You got to lay it out, and you can't assume that they know it. Just like you can't assume they don't know the betting aspect of what they can and can't do once they become a member, once they enter that organization, once they walk through those doors. And so they'll have speakers come in to talk to them about financial advice. They'll talk to them about betting. I'm sure they'll have all the league office. The officials will come in. But it's really important to have a great onboarding session, because you just can't. But, they're coming from different places with a different mindset, and the quicker you inundate them into your program, the better you're going to be.
Yeah, no, pay attention to all those rookies out there. No more wagering on the NFL. You can't do it. And do not wager at the facility, even if you're betting on basketball, the playoffs, you're betting on hockey that's happening.
Delete your apps.
Don't do it at the facility.
Delete your apps.
Also,
don't do it. Be Dr. Phil. Don't do it.
Just don't press send. Don't do it. Delete the apps. All of them apply for these NFL rookies. But yeah, I think it's a time for those guys to kind of get involved, because once the veterans get there, I feel like unless you're one of those high draft picks, you sort of get lost in the shuffle as a younger guy. So I guess this is an important time to kind of get those guys in there now and figure out how to practice is important. We don't need guys on the ground rolling over people's ankles or stuff like that happening out in OTAs and minicamp.
And when we come back from the break, there's a great Brady story I think they all should hear.
Excellent. Well, we'll go ahead and get to that Brady story. We'll also get to a soundbite out of New England Patriots rookie minicamp. And we did not forget it. You guys submitted them all throughout the weekend. The GM Shuffle Mailbag. We'll hit those questions coming up next here on the GM Shuffle. We're going to take a quick break right now.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
As we were headed to break there, Michael, you wanted to tell us a story about Tom Brady and rookie minicamp. The only story I know is that Brady, when he said to Mr. Kraft, said, "Hey, this is the best decision that you've ever made," and they went ahead and won 6 Super Bowls in New England. But what's the story that you want to share with us?
Well, I think this story really sets up what he did in New England, because when he was at Michigan, he was, not highly recruited. I think he had one scholarship offer. He got drafted by the Expos in baseball. But, I think it was Cal and Michigan, and maybe that was it. And so he goes to Michigan, and he's so far down on the depth chart that he doesn't get any reps whatsoever. He maybe gets 2 reps at practice. And as most players, he's getting really frustrated, right? And so, he doesn't know what to do. So he has a meeting with his positional coach, and he says, "Look, I think I'm going to transfer. I want a chance, and no one's given me a chance here." And the coach said, "Look, here's the reality of your situation. No matter what reps you get, you have to make those the greatest reps you could possibly ever have." And Brady was like, "But I only get 2 reps." He said, "Then make those 2 reps the greatest reps." And so from that point, Brady decided, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm only going to get 2, but I'm going to bring as much enthusiasm and much energy. And when I get into the huddle, I'm going to be able to command the huddle. I'm going to act with confidence, and I'm going to treat those 2 reps as my lifeline. And so then 2 reps went to 4 reps, and 4 reps went to 10. And all of a sudden, now he's really competing. And so the message here is don't look at the depth chart if you're a young player. Just like if you're at work, don't look at the people that you're competing with. Focus on making your stuff the best it can possibly be, no matter what you get. If you get a chance to write one memo or you get a chance to do one thing, make it the best you can. And have the mindset with, enthusiasm, as Jim Harbaugh likes to talk about, unlike any other. And I think that's really something, and that's part of onboarding too. I think that story needs to be told by the head coach or by the people that are meeting with the players, because everybody gets frustrated with no reps and everybody starts looking at the depth chart, when in reality, you can only control what you can control.
Yeah, I think it's a really great lesson, not just for sports, but for all of life there. Because, people do it in all walks, whether you're in the business world, you're in the media world, and all this. It's like, oh, I'm not getting this or I'm not getting that. And it's right to, if you're a competitor, you're going to get frustrated. But just like you said, make your reps the best reps possible. And then eventually somebody will hopefully notice you, and then you can kind of go on from there. I think it's a really good story and a really good lesson for everybody to take in mind here on this Monday. Let's get to the New England Patriots rookie minicamp, because an interesting quote from rookie tight end Jaheim Bell. He was asked about Gerod Mayo and this new Patriots, organization, the new era of New England Patriots football. And here's what he had to say about Gerod Mayo, about when he visited on his 30-day visit during the draft process.
When I came my visit, I didn't even know he was the head coach until, they told me it was him, because he was like one of the players. I like coaches like that that hang out, with their players around the building, and, don't act like a head coach. You know how some head coaches, they just, you can tell that's a head coach, but I couldn't really tell that I was the head coach until, I was introduced. But it's cool, to be around a coach like that, a player-led coach, so it's fun just to be around a guy like that.
I couldn't tell he was the head coach. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, Michael?
Well, it was on his visit, right? And so he wasn't in front of the team and all that. Yeah. But I don't know if this term player coach, player-friendly coach, is kind of the interesting subject here. It's where we are trending to go when it's never really worked before. You can listen to Deion talk to his coaches at Colorado, blatantly say, look, if you want to be friends with the players, if you want to be their buddy, they're going to turn on you at the game, and they're going to abandon you when something goes wrong. That's coming from Deion. You can listen to it on Instagram if you want. And so I think there has to be a little bit of a, look, I am in charge. And what Bell's saying is interesting, because when you are a leader, you don't have to tell anybody you're the leader. When you hold the authority, you shouldn't have to exert your authority. It should be accepted by your knowledge, by your intelligence. And I think that's something that has to replace this player coach. Listening to the players, understanding what they need, all that's important. But leadership requires pushing people. And it requires, and as much as we want to ignore it, every title that's been won this year has been from a coach who pushes the players. So I don't know if this player-friendly atmosphere works. When Belichick came to Cleveland, the first thing he got rid of was the basketball court, right? In the gym, in the locker room. Meanwhile, Mayo, who's been in this environment, they put a court in. And so what they're trying to create is the opposite of what they had before. And I've lived this, right? So we had Marty Schottenheimer, who was a very good tactician. And unfortunately, Marty could never get over the hump, right? And because he could never get over the hump, he got replaced by Bud. And Bud was not as organized, not as detailed. None of those things that Bud had. And so, we lived off of a little bit of Marty's ability. But once it became all of the Bud part, we just fell apart. And the next year, the season was over. And I think, to me, when you have that constant change, there has to be a reestablishment of what are the priorities, what is the foundation, and that's going to be the challenge for Mayo. He has to understand that being liked is different than being respected.
Oh, 100%. And I think the guy I always point to in these spots is like Andy Reid. Like every Chiefs player, and it's really known that the Chiefs training camp is one of the toughest training camps in the NFL. But like he still has like his ice cream day or whatever, or like the fast food Fridays, whatever they do out there at training camp. Like there's still like a little bit of a treat at the end of it. But when they're on the field, it's grind time, and it's in the classroom, it's grind time. Like we are going at it. We're playing in preseason games. Mahomes always plays in the preseason. Like there's no camp cupcake for the Kansas City Chiefs, and you wonder why they keep winning the division every single year and going to the AFC Championship game at worst every single year, because like that tone is set not just from Mahomes being a great quarterback, because he is, but it's set from the head coach and Andy Reid of saying, hey, like I'm not your best friend. You're going to respect me, but yeah, we can get along and have our fast food Friday, but you better be here to work, because that's what is required to ultimately win and win at a high level. So Gerod Mayo, this is year one. We'll see how this kind of comes together here for the New England Patriots.
I mean, it's the same.
It's an interesting comment.
Yeah. I mean, this has been tried before. Jim Zorn and it's been tried. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, we'll just keep monitoring that. All right, let's get to the GM Shuffle mailbag here, Michael. I mean, we appreciate everybody for submitting the questions over the weekend. This is awesome. This is something that we're doing for the first time, and the questions were great. If we don't get to the question or your question specifically, we apologize. Maybe we'll do this later on in the offseason. We can do a part 2 and get some more questions as we get closer to the season. But with that said, and also I apologize if we mispronounce anybody's name. We'll just go ahead and get out in front of that one. But we'll start off with Christopher Reeves here on Twitter. He asks a simple question: why do teams panic and overdraft the quarterback position?
Because they're afraid of getting fired. Because what creates longevity? Hope. And if you draft a quarterback, the hope that he's going to develop resides with you. Now, if you're a coach like Matt Eberflus, who drafted a quarterback and it doesn't go well for him, then he probably won't be there next year. But the hope is that if you show that he's had progress with this coach, then let's just continue going. It's job preservation, and the value goes up, because I'm not sure, Christopher, that people understand how to win games in a three-dimensional fashion with the quarterback not carrying the burden. Very few coaches, especially in this world where we're in subcontractor, understand how to create a 3-element football team with a quarterback who's slightly below the line. And I think because of that, the hope comes into play. Let's draft this guy, and it helps the personnel guys. It helps the GM. But ultimately, if you pick the wrong guy, you're going to get fired.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking back to. I'm like, if you get the wrong guy, it's curtains, and it's usually within a couple of years if that happens to be the case. But if you hit the right guy, maybe you're there for quite a long time, and you can go from there. All right, this next one from Adruo, or it's ADRUWO, all in caps here. We appreciate the question. He said, going back and watching drafts from the late 90s and early 2000s, front office staffs were much more transparent with the media in terms of specific players that they were targeting with early picks. Is the secrecy in today's process necessary?
Yeah, it is, because, again, just ask Sean Payton. He thought nobody was on Patrick Mahomes, and he's sitting there at 11, and Andy Reid, moved up to 10 to take him in front of him, because Andy Reid knew somehow, some way, that the Saints wanted Mahomes. And so, especially early in the draft, you have to be really guarded, and guys have lost jobs for letting things out, and that's been problematic. And so you don't want to lie to your friends who are newspaper people, but you got to understand the element that comes into play, where if you don't get the player because loose lips sink ships, it's a problem. So, yeah, I definitely think secrecy is important. I'm not sure it was as transparent in the 90s. We had a pretty good idea, but probably because we didn't have Twitter. So it was a little bit more newspaper read, hard copy. And, probably people dug a lot deeper to get the information, because now all you do is make one phone call and you write a column right online and it's up the next day.
Yeah. Or you can put a tweet out off of one phone call. Oh, hearing such and such, and then it gets engagement. And that's how it works these days. The content machine now needs to be fed 24/7. Let's squeeze another one in before we hit this break. We'll obviously do more on the other side. But who are your current top 5 GMs for team building and player evaluations? This is from Jim D.
Well,
we appreciate it,
Jim, it's a great question. I think the combination of Andy Reid and Brett Veach has proven to be a really good team builder, especially they trade Tyreek Hill and they move on. I think Kyle and Lynch have done a really good job of building that team within the vision. I think it requires coach and personnel guy. I don't think it can be separate, right? It's going to be interesting to see Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen as they build this thing out in harmony together. The job of a general manager is to help the head coach develop the system. When John Schneider was with Pete Carroll early on, that was as good a combination as you're going to get, right? And I think that works. I think Goot, as much as Big Daddy doesn't think Green Bay has any players, he's got to build the team the right way for LaFleur, even though he has a fresh haircut. But those are the kind of guys you look at, you say, okay, I get this. But it's got to be a partnership. And they have to share the philosophy of one another so that they know exactly what the other guy wants to do. And there's got to be stability within the framework. And the head coach got to be a head coach.
Well, that leads us to Keith's question on the other side. For our DraftKings Network audience, we say so long. For the podcast audience, stick with us. We'll be back with more of the GM Shuffle mailbag after the break.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
Well, as we're heading to break, Michael, you were just finishing answering Jim D's question about the top 5 general managers and team building and player evaluation, and you brought up how it has to be kind of a team. There needs to be a partnership within the general manager and the head coach, which leads us to Keith Griggs' question, which is, why don't owners hire coaches and GMs as a team? Hire together and fire together, then they have the motivation to be on the same page.
Well, I mean, it's hard to get coaches and GMs on the same page. I think not a lot of GMs understand the philosophy of the coach, and not a lot of coaches understand the player. One thing that makes Andy Reid unique is the fact that he really is a good evaluator. Kyle's a really good evaluator, which helps. I think Kyle watches every guy. John Harbaugh, because of his special team background with DaCosta, that makes them a good partnership because they're used to watching players, right? And if the head coach isn't really a draftnik, like let's say, Doug Peterson in Jacksonville, right? Trent Baalke's going to do it, and Peterson's interested, but, he's not a draftnik, right? It makes it hard. Telesco is going to run the draft. He had, when he was with Staley, I mean, there were two separate entities, and there was really no collectivity, whereas like Seattle now, Schneider hired McDonald, when Schneider went there, he was placed there in Seattle, and he formed that partnership with Pete because he understood what was going on. And so I think, Minnesota has that. I think it's challenging to get people to have that vision. And look, there's a lot of guys that have the title of general manager that are really just director of college scouting. They really are. And they don't really understand the pro game. One of the biggest misconceptions about the draft, and one of the things that has to change, is the understanding of the pro game. And too many scouts who are on the road think they know the pro game, but they really don't understand it from a coach's standpoint, which then hurts the overall scheme of it. So, I think it's hard to find that partnership. It really is hard. And if the head coach isn't a great evaluator to go along with the personnel guy who's a great evaluator, then it's going to break down no matter if you're on the same page or not.
Real quick, this is just a follow-up from me. Like, how many different general managers are there in the league? Like, I feel like there's some that are cap guys that came up as cap guys, some that came up as like the college scouting director, some that came up as pro guys. Like, how many different versions of a GM do we see? Because there's different types of quarterbacks, there's different types of receivers. How many different types of GMs do we have in the league?
Well, there's all sorts of kind. Most of them have come through the college ranks, right? Because like Joe Douglas is a college guy, and you wonder why the Jets sometimes have a disconnect in terms of building their team. He's a college scout. He drafts like a college scout, and I think to me there's an art of team building. Omar Khan comes from a salary cap background. So he, not saying he doesn't scout, but he listens to kind of based on value that brings to the table. There's all sorts, but I think you really have to do a good job of understanding your own team and understanding the philosophy of the team. But your head coach has got to be in the same boat with you. It can't be the receiver coach controls what he controls, the running back coach controls his running back. I want this player. No. The organization wants this style of player. You just coach it, right?
Yeah.
That's a hard thing to do. That's, that goes back to the Parcells line. Well, I want to pick the groceries. He wants to pick the groceries. He didn't want his running back coach to be shopping. He was going to help pick with somebody he worked with. They would sit in the room and they would look through it. That's where I think there's such a disconnect where you don't have that. And again, it comes back to we assume everybody's a good evaluator of talent. I've been around some really, really bad evaluators of talent that were head coaches, really bad. And that becomes a problem because if you're not within symmetry to that and the guy can't evaluate and understand what role is he going to play? Like if Super Bowl winning GM Terry Fontenot walked into Bill's office and he was running the draft and he tried to convince Michael that he should pick Michael Penix after signing Kirk Cousins for $100 million, how do you think that conversation would have gone?
Probably not.
And it wouldn't have been about Penix not being a good player. It would have been about, explain to me the trajectory of this pick. Mm-hmm. Most scouts just, okay, we'll give you the player, you got to figure it out. And there's such a disconnect. It's one of the things that hasn't been able to be unified in New York with the Giants. I know Shane and Dable are on the same page. They both come from Buffalo. Are we sure they're good evaluators? Are we sure they understand how the art of team building? They all go back to what we did in Buffalo. Well, sometimes what you did in Buffalo may not be what you need to do in New York.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put that one. This next question from James Crawford. With the knowledge you have now, what would you tell your younger self as it relates to being a leader and building a football team? What are non-negotiable qualities of a leader?
To have a true belief and philosophy of who you are. And I think the biggest mistake I've made in my career has been that I was in jobs that I could only that I could only grow from, and I tried to make a difference, which alienates people. Because if I saw something wrong, I was going to say it. And that just pissed people off. And so I didn't realize till later in life that we all have jobs we can grow from and jobs we can make a difference from. And so if I were to tell my younger self, I would have said, just stay in your office, keep your head down, don't say anything, just keep going, be loyal to your job and let it go, and don't try to be the disruptor, because disruptors get cast aside. And then once you develop your own philosophy and you have an opportunity to present yourself in the right manner with the authority that you would have, I've never had the authority to run an organization. Even when I was the GM in Cleveland, Joe Banner was the president. He had the authority over all player personnel decisions. I knew that going in. I accepted it. I had no problem. I wanted to get back in the league. But to me, if you're in a job you can only grow from, you just got to grow. And if you're in a job you make a difference, that's when you have to do it. And if you don't understand that, you'll ruffle feathers.
Well, getting back into the league leads us to our next question here. Some people are very curious, Michael. This from Josh Gilly. He says, if all 32 teams fire their GMs tomorrow and all 32 wanted you for the job, which job would you take? Maybe the top three or bottom three. And then also with Train's question, he says, do you ever have an itch to get back into the league? What would be a good situation? Any coaches that you would like to partner with? So those kind of two questions sort of go together a little bit, but people are curious.
Yeah.
Don't leave the pot is what I'm saying, but people are curious.
I said this from the beginning. The jobs today are about the owner. The jobs today are about the owner. Will the owner buy into your program? Right? So if you had a chance to interview with all 32 owners, who's going to buy into your program? And you can't be misled. You have to be, I thought that Mark Davis would buy into the New England program. He had no interest in it, right? Once it hit a rocky road, he bailed. And probably was the right decision. I'm not second guessing it. I'm just saying it. But the challenge is to find an owner that shares your philosophical belief and will allow you to implement the plan. Because you can't be a leader if you don't have backing. Eric Spoelstra is the leader of the Miami Heat because Pat Riley gives him the backing. Mm-hmm. And the owner of the Heat gives Pat Riley the backing. And there's very few teams in the league that will do that. I mean, Mike Brown will do that. The Cincinnati Bengal job is a great job. It's a great job because Mike Brown's old school. And I say that with all due respect. But he's going to if he shares your philosophical belief along with his family, he's going to let you do it. And he's not going to second guess a mistake here and allow the media to interfere with him. Pittsburgh's the same way. And I think that's why there's very few jobs that are great jobs. I tell a lot of college head coaches that I talk to on a regular basis, you have a better job than 95% of the NFL. Because 95% of the NFL has people that are interjecting, has beliefs that are coming in trying to create a situation. San Francisco is a tremendous place because Jed York made a decision that he was going to hire somebody that he could turn the franchise over in the Bill Walsh model and give it to Kyle. And Kyle's delivered. And so he can step back. Now he's got Prague there to help with the finance. They've got all the things they need to do, right? They made mistakes. Right? They made mistakes on Trey Lance, a huge mistake, but nobody fired anybody. And I think to me, that's what makes these jobs so interesting. And for me to go, I see myself as a writer today, not as a general manager, because I want to keep writing books. Mm-hmm. So I've never really thought about it, but it would have to be the owner and the head coach. You know, and only the head coach that understood what I have seen. Because it's very challenging to work for somebody that you're talking Greek and he's talking Spanish.
Well, my 2 cents is don't leave us. We appreciate doing the GM Shuffle pods. I know you wouldn't be able to do them if you were working in the league. And I'm sure people are hearing your response. It says, so if Bill gets a head coaching job next year and he asks and calls you and says, Michael, you want to come work with me in this organization, would you be interested in that position?
Well, I think Bill, I think if Bill takes one of those jobs, I think they don't want senior citizens in the building. So I would say that's probably wouldn't happen at all. I mean, once you get to a certain age in this league, you become like you're a senior citizen. And what I think is interesting is I've grown as a human being, as a father, husband, son, all those things. As you grow, you realize that experience is important, but expertise is more important. And I think some of these owners don't understand the difference between what experience is and what expertise is. And expertise is a rare commodity in the NFL, a very rare commodity.
Well, let's keep it moving. This one is more team-specific, but kind of ties into what we've been talking about with ownership. This one from Spenny. What can other owners learn from Sheila Ford Hamp with respect to Detroit's turnaround over the past few years? Sticking with a few years plan seems to be difficult for other teams like Panthers, Jaguars, Raiders, and I guess kind of how can they learn from this in this process with the Lions 4 or 5 years ago were the laughingstock and now they're a contending team for a Super Bowl?
Well, their corporate structure has always been an issue in Detroit, right? They've always had a GM with the authority going way back and the head coach, and they've been very corporate like Ford Motor Company. And I think what they did was they hired a president who was part of the interview process with Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia, and he really wanted to hire Mike Vrabel. And Quinn vetoed it and hired Patricia. And then he gained more power within the company, and that's why if you look at Campbell and Vrabel kind of have the same demeanor, same kind of, persona, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I think that the Ford, and I've always said this, I think the Ford family has been one of the greatest franchises to work for in the NFL because they leave you alone. They leave you alone. It's a great sports town. It's got great football history. And the owner doesn't come in and meddle and say, we should do this, this, and this. So I think there's a lot to learn from that. And there's one thing about being patient. It's another thing about being wrong, right? You can't be patient and wrong, because it's never going to get right. It's like we're lost but making great time. It's like we're lost, but we're still making great time. Like you're going nowhere. Yeah, and so I think that's a hard thing. And I would say that first of all, I think every owner should read Gridiron Genius, not because I wrote it, but because it will teach them how to ask the right questions. See, the owner's job is really not to make decisions. It's to ask the right question. And there's no better example than when Peter King wrote about Kyle Shanahan sitting next to John York Sr. And York's like, if you have a 4th-round grade on Brock Purdy, why aren't you picking him? Give me the reason why you're not picking him. Yeah. And Kyle couldn't give him one. And it saved the franchise. That's the job of the owner, to ask the right questions. Like, are we sure this is the right decision? Arthur Blank, are we sure that picking Michael Penix will secure us a chance to win today and win tomorrow? And explain to me how you do that. But it sounds like what they did was Arthur wanted Cousins, so they made him happy, and they wanted Penix, and it made them happy. Well, they're never going to win like that.
I guess it's a 2 timeline situation, but maybe if he doesn't play for 4 to 5 years, it'll be a success. We'll put the football ones off to the side here real quick. Let's mix in a fun one here. Favorite Sopranos villain? This is from Joe Stoner. Favorite Sopranos villain? Is it Ralphie, Richie, Phil Leotardo, or anyone else?
I would say it's Richie, because Richie was dangerous, and I think Richie was dangerously old school, and he was not afraid. Like Uncle Junior said, look at the moxie on that little guy. Such a little guy, but had such moxie. Yeah. I think he was really dangerous. Ralphie, Tony could have handled Ralphie better if he would have kissed Ralphie a little bit, patted him on the. All Ralphie wanted was love and attention. Right? Ralphie wanted to be appreciated. Like, Ralphie was always going to stay in his lane. He respected the chain of command, but Tony didn't give him any love. Tony fought him on everything. Tony saw him as an outcast, and Tony saw him as somebody who was disrupting. And as I said earlier in this podcast, when you're a disruptor, you can piss people off and causes your career to have a downside. So, and then Leotardi, Phil was not smart. Right, Phil was just old school. He was hung up in his power, and he was going to use his power to show he was in control. That never works. Richie was dangerous, and Janice, by shooting him, really saved the family, and she should be rewarded. And that's why Richie's buried on a little hill with pine cones overlooking a lake.
I think the most satisfying part of the entire series for me was when they ran over Phil Leotardo. Honestly. Like, I was done with him. By the time I was like, I'm so done with this guy. I literally cheered when it happened, which is probably just says maybe more about me.
It's a great story, though. It teaches you to understand who you need to respect and not make fun of, right? Like, it's easy to make fun of the jacket and Richie and all his quirks and all that. But I think we see this in the world today, and because we rely on misinformation all the time, look, I'm not political at all, but we had Trump came to Wildwood the other day, and he had some rally and I was driving. I had to drive south to get my registration done, and I'm stuck in this traffic, and it's like, what the frick is going on here? Like, people were driving to Wildwood. And so I watched the news. I'm like, I had no idea what the hell was going on, nor do I give a shit, right? And so they say, well, he had a rally down in Wildwood. And so I listened, and they said, oh, there was about 30,000 people there. And I'm like, are you kidding me? There was at least 100. I mean, I'm not an expert, but there had to be at least 80,000 people there. Millie's like, why are you so obsessed with this? And I'm like, because they're telling us there's 30, but there's really, they're lying to us. And what happens is you don't give your opponent any respect. People don't listen to you. People tune you out. And I think as a villain, as somebody, if you got to learn from it. Whereas Tony didn't respect Richie, Tony really didn't respect Ralphie, and that's why he became such a bad villain. And I think there's lessons in all that.
Oh, that's a really like you say. Oftentimes, a lot of stuff goes back to The Sopranos. You can learn from it. I'm due for another rewatch of that.
It's incredible.
Once the schedule gets released and all that stuff, I'm due for another rewatch of The Sopranos. Once we kind of get back into the dog days of July here. The next question from Rick Dawkins: what's the day-to-day of a general manager from the day after the draft until training camp?
Well, that's a great question. I know for me, with Belichick, the day after the draft starts on the next year's draft. So the Monday after the draft, go in to meet with Bill, go over the landscape of the country. Let's start in the Pac-12, or what was the Pac-12. You take these 6 teams, I'll take these 6 teams, we'll meet in 3 weeks and go over every player. Write a report on all those guys. Do that in the morning. Afternoon, go see the practices. Watch the practice tape. Afternoon, watch pro tape on the team you're getting ready, your schedule, because we're going to have that come out. So you want to try to get a jump on that. Make sure how the teams are built are all done by everybody. So your mornings are college, your afternoons are pro. You can leave at 6 o'clock, 6:30, go home, get there early the next day. Next day, college tape. And when you watch the college tape, I'm going to watch the University of Washington's defense for 6 games against all the other teams, UCLA, USC, all that. So now I'm learning the conference. And 3 weeks when we have a meeting to go over it, I've written up, I know the Pac-12 really well. Then we start to the Southwest Conference or the Big 12. Then you go to the next one. And now you do this from the day after the draft until you go on vacation. June the 20th. June the 20th to July the 20th, if you have any free time, you watch some of the Southeast Conference. When you come back July 20th, now you start on the same thing. It's reversed. You do pro in the morning, go to practice, watch the practice tape. In the afternoon, you start working on all the Southeast Conference, and you write that up. And then usually by September 1, you've written up, let's say, 500 guys. You sit in a meeting, you have it, and now you get ready to go. And then during the season, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are spent just doing nothing but pro personnel. Friday and Saturday, you have time to do the college tape. You don't want to go to why would I waste time going to a game, travel to a game, go there when I can watch all the tape in the office? And then get that started updated on your reports and then just keep going. And then once January comes around, then you start just nothing on the draft.
And I'm sure that's how, like, once we get to January, then, like, the media, the folks like the DraftKings that cover this stuff, they're like, oh, like, heard from this general manager that teams are actually higher on X prospect or whatever once they start to hear those types of things. Which
I would say very few. I'm not bragging here. I would say very few GMs to keep that routine. I would say very few do that. You know, I remember talking to a GM in the league. He asked me what Belichick did on the draft. I told him, he said, oh, my God, my coach would never do that. The point here is if you don't do that, you know, if you don't stay on top of, if you're not watching practice during the season, you can't fix your team. Now, and during the season, what I left out was you have to come up with your team needs during the season. So you know, hey, we need this or we need that. And then you got to know who's on the practice squads so that if you need to take a guy, you can't rely just on one guy or how about this guy? How about that guy? So it's really a combination of being a pro personnel director and a college director, but it's all about using your time wisely.
Well, how much do you gain from the in-season practice? Because isn't it a lot of it very just game plan specific? Like, are you able to actually evaluate during a practice? I mean, majority of the time, guys aren't even wearing pads, right, for these practices. I know you get some padded practices, like a handful of them during the course of the season, but can you evaluate?
Yeah, you can, and we learned this. You know, one of the great things, I wrote about this in Gridiron, we learned that sometimes guys that play off cards can fool you. We had this great defensive tackle from the University of Cincinnati named John Thornton. This guy was huge, Femi. He was a man. I mean, just a man. And he kicked our ass in practice. But when they would hold up the card and you go this way, you go that way, and he did it.
Yeah.
But then when we put him in, his first game was against the Colts, and we put him in the game, and he just was disastrous. He sucked. And we learned that, you know, sometimes guys are card players, that they have to be told where to go. A receiver can look really good in practice because he doesn't have to think. He just runs 18 yards and breaks in. But in a game, you know, check, run, you know, signal, okay, now you're running a 13-yard, you know, whatever. Now he's got to think and go. Or now the coverage is changing and I got to adjust my route. Once you enter the element of surprise into it, now that becomes hard to evaluate. So as an executive, you got to understand that. But you can gain a lot of information watching the practice squad, especially offensive and defensive linemen. You can see how they're doing, what they're doing, what's going on, and then you're writing reports on them. Like every 4 weeks, you got to write a report on every player on your team. I can go through all my OneNote, and I got every player written up from 14, 15, 16, after every, including Brady. This is what he did in these 4 games. This is what he did in these 4. And then you're constantly watching it. You just got to do it. You just can't assume it's all going to get done. And you can't assume your pro personnel guy's doing it because, you know, he's getting ready for the opponent. That's called general managing. You got to oversee it all, but you got to still do it. But again, if I went to a team that didn't understand this, if I went to a team that didn't have a coach that understood this, I would be viewed as, oh, you're just meddling with the coaches. You're just picking up, you know, you're too involved with the coaching. See, there's that fine line, you know. It's hard. That's why you have to have uniformity.
It's got to get buy-in from everybody to ultimately have a really good organization. We got a few more. I know we're running up against it a little bit with time here, but I wanted to get to a few more of these questions. This one from Shane, I think it's Gagnon or Gagnon. Once again, I apologize on the pronunciation, but Shane, he writes in, When teams interview players at the combine, what are they trying to isolate on? What are they trying to focus in on? Do they try to mitigate bias? Keon Coleman's meeting with the Bills comes to mind. He makes them laugh, but is he the right receiver for them? Was their mind made up before he came to the meeting?
Maybe it was. I think what you're trying to do is have a specific plan for each player, right? I think you get like 60, you only get 15 minutes. So if you don't have a sheet in front of you where we need to ask this player about this, we need to uncover that, we need to test his intelligence out on this. Every player should have his own plan done by the college scouting director. Here's our concerns about this guy. Here's where we are. And then when he sits in front of the meeting, you start trying to nail that down. But you got to say to everybody, look, we can't judge this guy on 15 minutes. Now bias is starting to come in. Confirmation bias comes in. Every form of bias becomes a real issue. So you have to tell we're in a data collection period. Let's just collect the data and we'll figure out where we're going.
This one, a little bit of a fastball from my guy. Mike is his name. He writes in, Michael routinely says quarterbacks make receivers. You couldn't pick Joe Burrow out of a lineup pre-LSU. Then he plays with Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. In the pros, Chase and Higgins. Patrick Mahomes played with Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, who were household names before him. Hard to judge a quarterback who never had a guy. Only one is Lamar. That is Mike who sent that. We appreciate that question. You said we want some fastballs. That is a fastball.
I love it, Mike. I love it. I love it, Mike. And here's where I would say you're wrong. Okay, so Joe Burrow is a player in Athens, Ohio, 3-star in football. He's also led the state in basketball. Tremendous athlete, but he was only a 3-star. And Urban Meyer was obsessed with 3-stars, was obsessed with stars. Mm-hmm. And they drafted and Dwayne Haskins, yep. Right? Am I right?
Dwayne Haskins.
Right. I get the names messed up. Haskins, right? He's and he's a 5-star. And so when he comes to Ohio State, Burrow is so far down on the depth chart, you can't even see him. In fact, it's reliably reported to me, and I know this to be true, but I wouldn't say who told me, is that Burrow wasn't put in a red jersey in a scrimmage, and he was live during the scrimmage.
Jesus.
That's how little they thought of him. Okay? And they tackled him. And his mother was so upset, or father, went to the coaches and said, what are they doing to my kid? Like, what's going on? And so then he transferred there. His talent just wasn't recognized. And yeah, there's no question when a great quarterback meets a great receiver, there's unlimited potential. There is unlimited potential. But, I mean, look, Joe Montana won a Super Bowl with Freddie Solomon and Dwight Clark at receiver. Now, you say, well, it was a different game then. Well, we threw it quite a bit in 84. And then we got the great Jerry Rice in 85 to start the 85 season. And all of a sudden, Jerry Rice in that system, in that offense, outdid Al Toon, outdid Eddie Brown, and everybody. So, yeah, I'm not arguing that the receivers don't enhance it, but if you go through Brady's career and all the Super Bowls he won, I mean, the last Super Bowl when they won 13-3, I know Cooks was there, or no, Cooks wasn't even there.
No,
they lost out on. Yeah. No, Cooks went to the Rams, right? Cooks was on the other team, and so it wasn't a team that had incredible receivers. So the quarterback makes the offense go.
Yeah, well, there you go. I mean, it's a fair question from Mike because he points to he had a follow up on the tweet.
I love it. It's awesome.
Allen getting Diggs, Hurts getting AJ Brown, and then Justin Herbert having Mike Williams, Keenan Allen. So it's an interesting football question to have there from Mike. We appreciate that one, and it's not all fun questions. We got to throw some fastballs in there as well. Here's another one from Enrique. Goes by Reek. He says, "We all know Bill Belichick is a good friend of yours, but have you ever been honest enough to tell him, Bill, that pick is not going to work?"
Oh, yeah. And he's told me that my idea sucks too. That's part of being a friend. Mm-hmm. Yeah, hell yeah. I mean, and so, what you try to do, the beautiful thing about this whole operation is that you can have this kind of dialogue and nobody's feathers get ruffled. Very few people that I've worked with, you could have conversations without their feathers getting ruffled. Belichick is one of them. And he could tell me, and I didn't get my feathers ruffled. I would just try to prove it. I would try to prove to, with Al Davis, I would try to prove to him that, what I thought. But, he tuned you out.
Yeah, I mean that's
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what made the relationship so good, because it was so much fun you learn more when you disagree. You learn less when you agree.
100%. I think that's honestly like what a really good friendship is. Like you should be, if somebody you consider is a really good friend, you should be able to tell them when they're in the right, when they're in the wrong, because that's being a friend. It's not just being a hey yeah yes man or whatever like that. So I think that's a really good dynamic here. Two more that we'll get to before we wrap this thing on up here. Why do you think Coach Bill Belichick is the GOAT over Coach Bill Walsh if the latter's coaching tree was way more successful and still present, and the basis of his offensive system continues to be present within the NFL? That is from Manuel.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, look, the greatest, I think Walsh is clearly an incredible coach, and his ability to teach his system. But Andy Reid's getting a reputation for having a lot of great coaches, when in reality, I mean, how did Matt Nagy work out for him, right?
He's back.
Steve Spagnuolo went on to be a head coach. How'd that work out for him, right? I think to me, it's like John Harbaugh was successful, but who else is from the Andy tree that has been really good? And so I don't know. I mean, I'm asking the question, right? Like who has been taken from there that has gone on to prove to be this is such a fertile area? I think it's all dependent upon the person. And this isn't like, where we're just breeding out good coaches. That you have to be able to take what the coach teaches. You have to take the principles of Walsh and apply it to your life. Like Mike Holmgren goes from San Francisco with all of Walsh's principles. He gets to Green Bay. He's got Ron Wolf with him. Their partnership formed together. Wolf understood what he was looking for. He developed the talent. He drafted a talent. Perfect marriage, right? Mm-hmm. That worked. Mike Shanahan goes to Denver. Puts his own spin on it. Because remember, when Shanahan goes to San Francisco, he had to watch all the old tapes to learn the offense. That wasn't what he was familiar with. And so the organizational structure that he brought with him to Denver, he brings Neil Dowland with him. So I think there's a little bit of a misconception out there. And, I think sometimes guys got head coaching jobs that probably shouldn't have gotten them.
Yeah. I mean, it has to, like this whole thing goes back to buy-in.
Yeah, Lombardi, I mean, Phil Bankston was on the he took over for Vince Lombardi. That was a disaster. Bankston wasn't, I mean, he's a great defense coordinator. None of Lombardi's coaches from his staff ever went on to anything. Tell me the Shula staff that went on. Paul Brown picked Bill Johnson over Bill Walsh. Now, Shula comes from the Brown tree. That's why you should read Football Done Right, because it explains all this.
There you go. Football Done Right. If you haven't bought it or read it by now, you should get on that. Some nice off-season
Good Father's Day gift. Yes,
really
Father's
good.
Day.
Already thinking ahead to next month. Last question. This one was a late submission this morning, about 4 hours ago, from Brad Lemons. It's not on the rundown, but I've always been curious of this, and I think we have enough time to do it. What is Michael Lombardi's JFK theory? What does Mike think really happened? Who did it, and why?
Oh, that's a great question, because I'm so far down a rabbit hole right now that
of course you are.
I'm going to be on the JFK. I'm on the JFK, Solving JFK rebuttal episode. I'm going to tape it probably, I don't know, Matt hasn't told me what day we're going to tape it. So I've been doing a lot of work on that and have found out way more stuff than I wanted. I was listening to a presentation. I had no idea that in Dealey Plaza there were yellow markings on the side across from the grassy knoll that were about 4 feet wide, that were placed in different sections along Dealey Plaza, not together. They were, Femi, they were kind of like don't park here looking things, but they were only painted on top of the curb and on the side, and they were 4 feet and they were separated, which was clearly the marking of a kill zone. I think it was a coup d'etat by our government. I think it was planned. I think Ed Lansdale, the general, was there on the ground in Dallas. I think it was orchestrated. I thought the men were brought in from different areas. I think there were 3 teams. I think there was certainly a lot of people that heard shots from the grassy knoll, from the Daltex building. And I think everything was planted in Mrs. Payne's garage to make sure that we thought Oswald was guilty. Because here's a man that, they tried to link the Edwin Walker killing to him. And here's Edwin Walker sitting in his study working on his tax returns. and he gets a shot fired into his study, and he's a sitting target. And if Oswald was such a great marksman, why wouldn't he have killed General Walker? But he missed it. The shot missed. And then that was in April. Then in November of the same year, you want me to believe that he was up on the 6th floor with a moving target away from him, which is the hardest shot any marksman will tell you to do, and he hit one right in the head. Like stop. Like, they manipulate Oswald into what they want him to become.
You got a lot of reps in, maybe.
And so when you really go, he had none reps. Nobody could find the gun. Even Marina, she was a disaster in all the testimony, but he could never find the gun. The scope was bad on the gun. They did a testing on him, and he never, when he was in the police office, he never fired a gun. I used to think Tippit murder was really the understanding of this whole thing, but I think the Ruby involvement is so deep, and Ruby asked to be moved to Washington. We all saw that in the JFK trailer, the movie, and they said, we can't do that. 87 people they brought to Washington to interview for the Warren Commission, but they wouldn't move Ruby. There's something there. So to me, I think it was a coup d'etat. I think just by the actions that were placed moving forward. Here's what I do know for a fact, Femi. There is no way in a court of law that Lee Oswald would have been convicted of murder. There's just no way. Of the president or of Tippit or shooting Walker. There's just no way. There's no way. And to me, because he's not here, there was no way there was a trial, which saved everybody. So now we have mass confusion and who's right, who's wrong, which is exactly what they want. So nobody has any authority over the subject.
When are you going on the Solving JFK pod? You said you know when it's...
I don't know. He's going to tell me when we're going to record it. I don't know when it's going to go up, but it's going to be the rebuttal episode to the Edwin Walker shooting and the backyard photos, which were completely unbelievable. Everybody, the backyard photos are fake. Well, let me ask you something. Lee Oswald didn't have a lot of money. I think they found when they arrested, one of his wallets had $13 in it. When he got arrested, they found 4 wallets. One of them was planted by Kenneth Croy, the police officer from the Dallas Police Force. And so the wallet had $13. So when they went to his apartment where he lived, and then they went to Ruth Payne's garage, they never found the clothes that he was taking in the picture. Now, does this look like a man who's willing to throw away his clothes? I mean, this isn't Allen Iverson who's just going to buy new wardrobes in every city. Right? If he was the lone gunman, right, he would have kept his clothes. He wants to be caught. So to me, it's just, if anybody believes he was on the 6th floor, you really have done no reading.
I think that's a good one to end it on. This was fun. I really appreciate it. We didn't get to all the questions. There was some that we had to leave off, but this was really great. Maybe we'll do this again maybe later on in the off season if there's some downtime, maybe in July or something like that. Yeah, we should, because we really appreciate all the listeners and viewers for submitting the questions. Once again, we apologize if we didn't get to yours. Thank you if we did get to yours. There were really, really good questions that sparked some good discussion. So maybe we'll go ahead and do this again, a GM Shuffle mailbag episode. But that does it for this edition of the GM Shuffle. Thank you to our producer, Elliot Bowman, with us on the ones and twos as always. Thank you to you, Michael. I think the people really appreciated your insight on some, I guess, broader range football topics that we don't really get to when we're discussing the news of the day. So I thought that was really good stuff. But until Thursday, we'll have a schedule release. I cannot wait for it. 272 regular season games. I cannot wait. No Twitter Femi Wednesday night. Just let it all hang here. No Twitter Femi Wednesday night. We'll let it marinate, and we'll save it for the pod Thursday morning. How about that?
There we go.
All right, I'll see you then.
All right, great. Thanks, Femi.
Yep.